My name is Javier, and at 68 years old, I never thought my only son would betray me. I trusted Thomas enough to put $7 million in his safe before our move to Portugal. The next morning, he and his wife Alicia vanished, taking the safe with them. They left a note saying, "Don't worry, Dad. It's for our future." I just smiled when I read it. What they didn't know was that the safe contained nothing but worthless paper. Before I tell you how I outplayed my own son, let me know where you're watching from. If this story of family betrayal sounds interesting, hit that subscribe button as I reveal how I protected my life savings. I spent 45 years building my wealth through careful investments and smart banking decisions. Back in the 70s, I started as a junior analyst at Morgan Stanley, with nothing but ambition and a finance degree from Penn State. Those early years were grueling, often working 16-hour days and weekends, but I was determined to make something of myself. During my third year at the firm, I met Maria, who worked in the legal department. She was brilliant, beautiful, and just as driven as I was. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant in Manhattan, where we talked until the owner politely asked us to leave because they needed to close. Within a year, we were married, and we promised to build our dream life together. We waited several years before having children, focusing on our careers and financial stability first. When Thomas was born in 1985, Maria and I were over the moon. He was our only child, our pride and joy. From the moment he came into this world, we dedicated ourselves to giving him everything we never had. Thomas was a bright child, curious about everything. I still remember teaching him to ride his first bike in Central Park, his small face determined not to fall. Maria would read to him every night, instilling a love of stories and imagination. We sent him to the best schools, took him on educational vacations around the world, and tried to teach him the value of hard work and integrity. As Thomas grew older, I noticed he expected things to come easily. Despite attending an Ivy League university on our dime, he struggled to find his footing career-wise. I pulled strings to get him interviews at several prestigious firms, but he never seemed to last more than a year at any job. He would complain about difficult bosses, unreasonable expectations, or simply claim the work wasn't fulfilling. Maria always defended him, saying he was just finding his path. 5 years ago, Maria was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. The disease moved quickly, and within 6 months, I lost my partner of 40 years. Thomas seemed devastated at the funeral, but within weeks, he was back to his normal routine, rarely visiting me in the large house that suddenly felt so empty. 3 years ago, Thomas announced he was getting married to Alicia, a woman he had been dating for only 6 months. I was surprised by the rushed timeline, but supported him, wanting him to find happiness. When I first met Alicia at their engagement dinner, she was charming and attentive, asking questions about my career and seeming genuinely interested in my answers. Yet something about her felt rehearsed, as if she was performing rather than being authentic. After the wedding, Thomas and Alicia moved into a downtown apartment that I helped finance. Thomas had started a marketing consultancy that was struggling to find clients, and Alicia claimed to be working on a novel, though I never saw any pages. Their financial dependence on me grew steadily, with requests for help with rent, business expenses, and even vacation funds. I never minded supporting my son, but I began to notice his resentment when I asked questions about how the money was being spent. He would become defensive, accusing me of trying to control him through my wealth. "I'm not a child anymore, Dad," he would say. "I don't need you micromanaging my finances." Our family dinners became increasingly tense affairs. Thomas would drink too much wine and make passive-aggressive comments about my success. Alicia would smooth things over with practiced charm, but I could see calculation behind her smiles. Last year, I decided it was time for a change. With Maria gone and my retirement secure, I wanted to fulfill our dream of living abroad. We had visited Portugal years ago and fallen in love with the coastal town of Cascais. I found a beautiful villa overlooking the Atlantic and made plans to sell our family home and transfer my assets overseas. When I shared my plans with Thomas and Alicia over dinner, I noticed an exchange of glances between them that made me uneasy. Thomas recovered quickly, raising his glass in a toast to my new adventure. But something had shifted in the room. I couldn't have known then how significant that moment would be. The change in Thomas and Alicia's behavior was subtle at first, but unmistakable to someone who had spent decades reading people across negotiating tables. Suddenly, they were calling more often, dropping by my house unexpectedly, and showing unprecedented interest in my financial affairs. "Have you decided which bank you'll use in Portugal?" Thomas asked one evening while helping me sort through old photographs. "International transfers can be complicated. Maybe I could help you research the best options." "I've got it handled," I replied, noticing how his eyes lingered on the financial documents spread across my desk. "Franklin has been my attorney for 30 years. He's arranging everything." A week later, I was in my home office when I overheard Thomas and Alicia talking in the garden below my window. They didn't realize I could hear them clearly through the open window. "We need to know exactly how much he's moving and when," Alicia was saying, her voice low but intense. "This is our opportunity, Thomas. We might not get another chance." I know, Thomas replied. "But we need to be careful. Dad's not stupid." I quietly closed the window, my heart heavy. I told myself they might be planning a surprise retirement gift, or perhaps looking for investment advice. But deep down, a suspicion had taken root. The next time Alicia visited, I noticed a new diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist and designer shoes that must have cost thousands. When I casually asked about them, she laughed and mentioned a lucky day at a sample sale. Thomas had never mentioned his business suddenly becoming profitable, and I knew they were still asking me for money to cover their rent. Around the same time, Thomas began mentioning new friends, people he'd supposedly met through business connections. One evening, he invited me to dinner with a couple named Ryan and Samantha, who spoke knowledgeably about offshore investments and tax havens. They asked pointed questions about my retirement plans, and I gave vague, non-committal answers. Later, I ran a discreet background check and discovered Ryan had been investigated twice for investment fraud, though never convicted. The real shock came when Franklin called me one afternoon, his voice uncharacteristically concerned. "Javier, someone tried to access your investment accounts yesterday," he said. "They had your social security number and knew enough personal details to almost convince the customer service representative. Fortunately, they couldn't answer all the security questions." I sat heavily in my chair, feeling suddenly old. Was it Thomas? "The attempt was made online, so we can't be certain," Franklin replied carefully. "But I think you need to be vigilant. Perhaps change your passwords and check your credit report." That evening, I went through my home office more thoroughly and discovered several financial statements were missing. I also found a credit card statement showing Thomas had accumulated over $70,000 in gambling debts at Atlantic City casinos, something he had never mentioned. When confronted, Thomas broke down, claiming the gambling had started after his mother died, as a way to cope with grief. He swore he'd stop and promised to repay every penny. His tears seemed genuine, and I wanted desperately to believe him. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said, wiping his eyes. "I've been lost since Mom died. But I'm getting help now. Alicia's been so supportive, helping me find a therapist." I nodded, patting his shoulder. "We all cope in different ways, son. Just be honest with me from now on." 2 weeks later, Thomas proudly showed me a high-security safe he'd installed in their apartment's walk-in closet. "It's top of the line," he explained, demonstrating the digital lock and reinforced steel construction. Fireproof, waterproof, and practically impossible to break into without the combination. Even has a GPS tracking system built in if someone tries to move it. "Impressive," I said, not mentioning that no one who lived in a rented apartment needed such extensive security unless they were planning something. "What are you keeping in there? Crown jewels?" Thomas laughed a bit too loudly. "Just important documents, and some of Alicia's family heirlooms. Better safe than sorry, right?" That night, I used Thomas's laptop while he was in the kitchen making coffee. His browser history revealed searches for unregistered offshore bank accounts, countries with no extradition treaties, and how to transport large amounts of cash internationally. He'd also been researching properties in Bali and Costa Rica. My final confirmation came from my bank's fraud department. Someone had attempted to redirect my monthly pension deposits to a new account. The request had been made by phone by someone claiming to be me, but who couldn't provide all the necessary verification. The caller had my social security number and knew my mother's maiden name. "We've placed a security alert on your accounts, Mr. Reyes," the bank representative informed me. "I would strongly recommend you come into the branch to discuss additional protection measures." As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The denial I'd been clinging to evaporated, replaced by clarity. My son and his wife were planning to steal from me. The question now was what I would do about it. The sale of my house closed smoothly, leaving me with approximately $7 million to transfer to Portugal for my new life. The bank explained that international transfers of this size required special handling and would take several days to process securely. I would need to bring the certified check to their main branch downtown to initiate the process. When I mentioned this to Thomas during Sunday dinner, he immediately tensed up, exchanging another of those telling glances with Alicia. "Carrying that kind of check seems risky, Dad," he said, setting down his fork. "What if something happens on the way to the bank?" "The bank said it's the standard procedure," I replied, watching his reaction. Alicia leaned forward, her expression concerned. "There have been several muggings reported downtown recently. I read about it in the news." Thomas nodded eagerly. "Plus, banks have been known to freeze large international transfers for security reviews. It could delay your move by weeks. What would you suggest?" I asked, already suspecting where this was heading. Thomas didn't disappoint. You could use our safe temporarily. It's literally designed for this kind of situation. You'd have the only combination besides us, and the money would be secure until your transfer clears. No risk of muggings or banking delays." "That's very thoughtful," I said, pretending to consider the idea. "Let me think about it." The next morning, I called Franklin and asked him to meet me at my favorite diner, a place I knew Thomas and Alicia would never visit. Over coffee and eggs, I laid out everything that had happened, and my growing certainty that my son was planning to steal my retirement funds. Franklin removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Javier, I wish I could say I'm surprised, but I've had concerns about Thomas and Alicia for some time. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" "I want to catch them in the act," I said firmly. "Not just to protect my money, but to know for certain. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's an explanation." "And if you're right?" Franklin asked gently. "Then they'll face the consequences," I replied. "But I need to be smart about this." Together, we developed a plan. Franklin contacted a security specialist he knew from his years practicing law. Within 48 hours, we had everything in place. First, I had the bank issue the certified check as planned, but I deposited it into a new secure account that only Franklin and I could access. Then, I withdrew $50,000 in cash for the next phase of our plan. The security specialist provided us with stacks of realistic-looking blank paper cut to the exact dimensions of $100 bills. From a distance, or with just a cursory inspection, they looked like bundles of cash. We used the real $50,000 to create the top layer of each stack, so if Thomas or Alicia checked, they would see genuine currency. Next came the surveillance. With the specialist's help, we installed tiny cameras and microphones in Thomas and Alicia's apartment while they were out at a dinner I had deliberately arranged. The devices were focused on the safe and the main living area, where they were likely to discuss their plans. Finally, I purchased a high-quality GPS tracker, much more sophisticated than the basic one Thomas claimed was built into the safe. The security specialist helped me disguise it within one of the fake money bundles, ensuring it would remain with the safe no matter what happened. When everything was ready, I called Thomas. "I've been thinking about what you said. Using your safe until the transfer is complete makes sense. When can I bring the money over?" Thomas couldn't hide the excitement in his voice. "How about tomorrow afternoon? Alicia and I will be home all day. The next day, I arrived at their apartment with a secure briefcase handcuffed to my wrist, playing the part of the cautious banker to perfection. Thomas and Alicia welcomed me with unusual warmth, offering coffee and pastries before we got down to business. "Should we do this in private?" I asked, gesturing toward the bedroom where I knew the safe was located. "Of course," Thomas said, leading me down the hallway. "Alicia, could you make more coffee?" In the bedroom, Thomas opened the closet and revealed the safe. He entered the combination, and the heavy door swung open to reveal an empty interior, large enough to hold all the cash with room to spare. "You'll be the only other person who knows the combination," he assured me as I made a show of carefully placing the bundles of fake cash inside. I made sure to position the stack containing the GPS tracker prominently in the center. $7 million, I said, patting the stacks. My entire life's work, right there. Thomas swallowed visibly. "It'll be safe here, Dad. I promise." I nodded, entering the combination Thomas provided into my phone as if saving it. "I trust you, son." That evening, we had dinner together at an expensive restaurant, supposedly celebrating my upcoming move. I ordered champagne and made an elaborate toast to new beginnings and family bonds. Throughout the meal, I deliberately dropped hints about my updated will. With the move to Portugal, I've had to rethink my estate planning, I mentioned casually. Franklin suggested some changes to account for the international aspects. Thomas tried to appear only mildly interested, but I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. "Anything significant?" "Just ensuring everything goes smoothly when the time comes," I replied vaguely, making sure my assets end up exactly where they should. After dinner, I hugged them both goodbye, lingering a moment longer with Thomas. "I love you, son," I said, giving him one last chance to reconsider whatever he was planning. "Love you too, Dad," he replied, unable to meet my eyes. Back at my nearly empty house, I connected to the surveillance feed on my laptop. Thomas and Alicia had barely waited for my car to leave the restaurant parking lot before calling someone on speakerphone. "It's all set," Thomas said excitedly. $7 million in cash, just sitting in our safe. "Are you sure it's real?" An unfamiliar male voice asked. "I checked several of the bundles," Alicia replied. "It's real. Old man didn't even count it properly before handing it over." "When are you moving it?" the voice asked. "Tonight," Thomas answered. "The flight's booked for 6 a.m. We'll be in Bali before he even realizes we're gone." I watched as they hurried around the apartment, packing essential items into 2 large suitcases. Around midnight, they struggled to remove the safe from the closet, cursing its weight. "Did you have to put in so much cash?" Alicia complained, breathing heavily as they maneuvered it onto a folding cart. "Would you rather leave some behind?" Thomas snapped. They managed to get the safe into their car, covered with a blanket. Before leaving, Thomas wrote something on a piece of paper and left it on the kitchen counter. Then they were gone, and I switched to tracking their movement through the GPS. As I watched the blinking dot move through the city, I felt an unexpected sadness wash over me. Despite everything, despite knowing what was coming, I had held on to a tiny hope that Thomas would prove me wrong. I barely slept that night, watching the GPS tracker as it moved steadily north out of the city. Around 3 a.m, the signal stopped moving in an area I recognized as the Catskill Mountains, about 2 hours from the city. Thomas and Alicia had a small cabin there, supposedly for weekend getaways, though they rarely mentioned visiting it. At 7 a.m, I drove to their apartment, using the spare key they had given me years ago. The place was eerily quiet, drawers left partially open from their hasty packing. On the kitchen counter sat the note Thomas had written. "Don't worry, Dad. It's for our future. We'll be in touch when we're settled. Try to understand." I stood there, holding the paper, feeling a complex mixture of emotions wash over me. Despite having anticipated this moment, the reality of my son's betrayal hit me harder than expected. For a moment, I was not a successful banker or a careful planner, but simply a father whose child had broken his heart. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The display showed Thomas's number, and I answered immediately. "Thomas, where are you?" His laugh came through the speaker, confident and almost unrecognizable. "Far enough away that you won't find us easily. I just wanted to make sure you found my note." "I'm at your apartment now," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The safe is gone." "Yeah, about that," Thomas replied casually. "Consider it an early inheritance. You've always said everything you have would be mine eventually. We just accelerated the timeline a bit. $7 million, Thomas. Everything I've worked for, and now it's working for us," he said. "Look, you've had your time. You've lived your life. Now it's our turn. You'll be fine with your pension and Social Security." "How could you do this?" I asked, genuinely wanting to understand. "After everything your mother and I did for you?" There was a pause, and when Thomas spoke again, his voice had hardened. "You never understood what I really needed, Dad. You were always so focused on money and success, measuring everything by your standards. Well, now I have the money, and I'll use it better than you ever did. Thomas, please. It's not too late to fix this." "It is too late," he said firmly. "Don't try to find us. Don't contact the police unless you want your precious reputation ruined. I have enough dirt on your business dealings over the years to make sure you go down with us." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood in their abandoned apartment, the phone still in my hand, shocked by the threat. Thomas was bluffing, I knew. My business dealings had always been above board, but the fact that he would even say such a thing showed how far he had fallen, how completely he had embraced this betrayal. My phone rang again, this time showing Franklin's number. "They're gone," I said when I answered. "I know," Franklin replied. "The GPS shows them at the cabin. Are you okay?" "No," I admitted. "But I will be. How soon can you get here?" "I'm already on my way," he said. "And Javier?" "I've notified our security contact. He's standing by." Within 30 minutes, Franklin arrived at the apartment. He looked tired, but determined, carrying a small briefcase of his own. "I've been monitoring the surveillance feeds," he said. "They arrived at the cabin about 3 hours ago. They haven't left since." "What's the plan now?" I asked. "We follow them," Franklin said simply. "We have everything we need to prove what they've done. The surveillance footage, the GPS tracking, the evidence of their planning. When they open that safe and discover what's really inside, we'll be there to see their reaction. And then," Franklin placed a hand on my shoulder, "and then you decide what happens next. Whether you press charges or find another way to handle this, it's your call. But first, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with." We left the city in Franklin's car, following the GPS signal to the Catskills. The drive was mostly silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. The trees grew thicker as we climbed into the mountains, the roads narrower and less maintained. "They chose a good place to hide," Franklin commented as we turned onto a dirt road. "Remote, difficult to access. Probably planning to open the safe here before continuing to the airport." About a quarter-mile from the cabin, we parked the car behind a stand of trees and continued on foot. The small structure came into view, smoke rising from its chimney despite the mild spring weather. Thomas's car was parked haphazardly in front, one wheel up on the grass as if they had been in too much of a hurry to park properly. Franklin took out a pair of binoculars and scanned the cabin. "They're inside. I can see movement through the windows. The safe appears to be in the main room." We found a position behind a cluster of large rocks that offered a clear view through the cabin's largest window while keeping us hidden. Franklin set up a small directional microphone aimed at the window, and we put on headsets to listen. Inside, Thomas and Alicia were arguing intensely, their voices coming through our headsets with surprising clarity. "Why isn't the combination working?" Alicia demanded. "You said you knew it." "I do know it," Thomas insisted. "Dad must have changed it after I showed him how to use the safe." "Brilliant," Alicia snapped. "So now we have a $7 million paperweight. What's your plan now, genius? Thomas ran his hands through his hair in frustration. We could try to break it open. There must be tools in the shed. Break open a high-security safe? With what? A hammer and chisel? Alicia paced the small room. We need to find someone who can open it professionally. And how do we explain having a stolen safe full of cash? Thomas countered. Their argument continued as they tried various combinations and even attempted to move the safe to different positions, as if that might somehow help. After nearly an hour of failed attempts, Thomas slumped onto the couch in defeat. Maybe we should just go back, he suggested weakly. Tell Dad it was a misunderstanding, that we were just trying to protect his money by bringing it somewhere safer. Alicia laughed bitterly. Are you serious? He's not stupid, Thomas. He knows exactly what we were doing. She sat beside him, suddenly switching to a softer tone. Look, we've come too far to give up now. Let me call Ryan. He might know someone who can help us. Ryan? Thomas looked uncertain. I don't know if we should involve him more than we already have. We don't have a choice, Alicia insisted, already dialing on her phone. While they waited for Ryan to answer, Thomas tried once more with the safe, inputting the combination with careful precision. To his apparent surprise, the lock clicked and the door swung open. I got it, he exclaimed. Alicia, I got it open. She rushed to his side, ending her call without speaking. Together, they knelt before the safe, pulling out the stacks of what they believed was cash. Their initial excitement quickly turned to confusion. What is this? Thomas muttered, rifling through one of the bundles. The top bills are real, but the rest. He held up sheets of the blank paper we had prepared. Alicia grabbed another stack, then another, her movements becoming increasingly frantic. It's all fake. Just the top layers are real money. She looked up at Thomas, her face contorted with rage. He knew. Your father knew what we were planning. Thomas sat back on his heels, the color draining from his face. That's not possible. How could he have known? Because you've never been as clever as you think you are, Alicia said coldly, standing up. I told you we should have been more careful. I told you he would be suspicious after Maria died. What are you talking about? Thomas asked, looking genuinely confused. Alicia laughed, a harsh sound without humor. This was supposed to be simple. I've done it before, you know. Twice. Find a man with money, make him fall in love, then take what he has. But no, you had to choose your father, the paranoid banker who trusts no one. I felt Franklin tense beside me as we listened, and I put a restraining hand on his arm. This revelation was painful but necessary to hear. You've done this before? Thomas sounded shocked. What do you mean? Why do you think I insisted we move so quickly with our relationship? Alicia asked, pacing again. It wasn't because I was so in love with you, Thomas. It was because your mother had just died, and your father was vulnerable. The perfect target. She stopped, looking down at him with contempt. But you couldn't even manage this right. You were using me. Thomas stood up slowly. All this time? Of course I was using you, Alicia spat. Do you think I would have looked twice at a failed businessman living off his daddy's money otherwise? You were supposed to be my way to the real prize. Thomas lunged at her suddenly, grabbing her arms. You evil, manipulative bitch. You made me steal from my own father. Don't you dare blame this on me, Alicia hissed, twisting out of his grip. This was your plan too. You agreed to everything. You were happy to take his money. As they continued to argue, growing more vicious with each exchange, I turned to Franklin. I think we've heard enough, I said quietly. Call the police. Franklin nodded and stepped away to make the call, while I continued to watch the scene unfolding in the cabin. Thomas and Alicia's argument had escalated, with accusations flying back and forth. In their anger, they revealed more than either probably intended. I never wanted to steal everything, Thomas shouted. Just enough to start over. You're the one who pushed for all 7 million. Because anything less wouldn't have been worth the risk, Alicia countered. And don't pretend you weren't happy to take it. You've been complaining about your father controlling you with money for years. That doesn't mean I wanted to clean him out completely, Thomas protested. He's still my father. Alicia laughed cruelly. Your father, your father. That's all I've heard since we met. How successful he is. How he built everything from nothing. How you can never measure up. Well, now's your chance to prove you're just as smart as he. Island fixed this. Franklin returned, his expression grim. Police are on their way. ETA 20 minutes. He gestured toward the cabin. Anything new? They're turning on each other, I said. Alicia apparently has a history of this type of scheme. Franklin shook his head. I ran a background check on her when they first got engaged. She changed her name a few years ago. Before that, she was Angela Williams, wanted for questioning in Florida regarding the disappearance of an elderly man's life savings. You knew? I looked at him in surprise. Why didn't you tell me? I tried, Franklin said quietly. Remember that dinner, right before the wedding, when I mentioned having concerns about Alicia's background? You told me I was being paranoid, and that Thomas was an adult who could make his own decisions. I remembered the conversation now. I had dismissed Franklin's concerns, not wanting to interfere in my son's happiness. Another mistake in a long line of parental misjudgments. Inside the cabin, Alicia had moved to the window, peering out anxiously. We need to get out of here. Your father could have reported the safe stolen by now. And go where? Thomas demanded. We have less than $50,000 in real cash. Our flights were paid for with my credit card, which Dad will definitely be monitoring now. We still have the cards we took out in his name, Alicia reminded him. We can use those until we figure something else out. This was news to me. I looked at Franklin, who was already taking notes. Credit card fraud too, he murmured. We checked his other accounts, remember? Thomas said, running his hands through his hair. There's nothing accessible. Everything's locked down for the international transfer. What about the retirement accounts? Alicia pressed. You said you had the passwords. I tried those last week, Thomas admitted. The bank flagged the attempts as suspicious and locked them. Dad probably knows about that too. I did know. The bank had called me about unusual login attempts, which had only reinforced my suspicions. So we have nothing, Alicia said flatly. All this planning, all this risk, for nothing. We still have each other, Thomas offered weakly. Alicia's laugh was brittle. How touching. Your sentimentality is exactly why we're in this mess. She grabbed her purse from the table. I need some air. As she moved toward the door, Thomas suddenly lunged forward, grabbing her arm. You're not leaving. Not until we figure this out together. Let go of me, Alicia warned, her voice dangerously low. No. Thomas tightened his grip. You helped create this situation. You don't get to walk away now. What happened next was so fast I almost missed it. Alicia swung her purse at Thomas's head with surprising force. He staggered backward, releasing her arm, and she immediately bolted for the door. Alicia, wait! Thomas called, regaining his balance and moving to follow her. Franklin and I ducked lower behind our cover as Alicia burst out of the cabin, heading straight for the car. Thomas appeared in the doorway moments later, blood trickling from a cut on his temple where the purse had connected. She's getting away, Franklin muttered, tensing as if to intervene. Let her go, I said, placing a restraining hand on his arm. The police will find her. Right now, I need to talk to my son. Franklin looked uncertain. Are you sure that's wise? He's clearly unstable. I need to see his reaction when he realizes I'm here, I insisted. I need to know if there's anything left of the son I raised. After a moment's hesitation, Franklin nodded. I'll stay close. Be careful. I stood from our hiding place and walked slowly toward the cabin. Thomas had slumped onto the porch steps, head in his hands, not noticing my approach until I was only a few yards away. When he looked up and saw me, the blood drained from his face. Dad? How? How did you find me? GPS tracker in the safe, I replied simply, stopping a safe distance from him. Did you really think I'd trust you with $7 million after everything you've been doing? Thomas swallowed hard. What do you mean? The credit card fraud attempts, the calls to my bank pretending to be me, the attempts to access my accounts, the offshore research on your computer. I listed each betrayal tonelessly. Should I continue? I can explain, he began, but I cut him off with a raised hand. Don't. I heard everything you and Alicia just said to each other. I've been watching and listening since you arrived. Thomas's eyes darted around, finally noticing Franklin emerging from the trees. You've been spying on me? I've been protecting myself, I corrected, though I had hoped, right until the end, that I was wrong about what you were planning. For a moment, something like shame flickered across Thomas's face before being replaced by defiance. You never trusted me, never believed in me, always controlling everything with your money. I gave you every opportunity, I said quietly. Paid for your education, your wedding, your apartment, supported your business ventures, even when I knew they were poorly planned. What more should I have done, Thomas? You should have, he began, then faltered. You always made me feel like I wasn't good enough, not successful enough, not smart enough, not you enough. I felt a deep sadness hearing these words. Had I really made my son feel this way? Had my attempts to guide him only pushed him toward resentment? That was never my intention, I said honestly. Your mother and I only wanted you to be happy and secure. Well, I'm neither now, am I? Thomas laughed bitterly, gesturing to the cabin behind him. My wife just abandoned me. I'm about to be arrested for theft, and my father has been playing me like a fiddle. In the distance, we could hear sirens approaching. Thomas heard them too, his expression hardening. So this is it? You're sending me to jail? He asked, a challenging edge to his voice. You made your choices, I replied. Now you face the consequences. Just like that? Your only son? My son wouldn't have stolen from me, I said, the words painful but necessary. My son wouldn't have conspired with his wife to take everything I worked for. The Thomas I raised understood values, integrity, consequences. The police cars came into view on the dirt road, lights flashing. Thomas stood, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. What happens now? He asked, his voice suddenly small. That depends partly on you, I said. How honest you're willing to be, what you're willing to do to make amends. As the police officers approached, I stepped back, allowing them to take control of the situation. Franklin spoke with the officer in charge, explaining the situation and providing evidence of the theft and fraud attempts. I watched in silence as Thomas was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police car. Our eyes met briefly through the window, and I saw something there I hadn't expected. Not anger or defiance, but profound regret. One of the officers approached me. We've put out an APB for Alicia Reynolds. We'll find her, sir. I nodded my thanks, suddenly feeling every one of my 68 years. The adrenaline that had carried me through this ordeal was fading, leaving me drained and heartsick. What now? Franklin asked gently as the police cars pulled away, Thomas looking back at me through the rear window. Now we finish what we started, I said, straightening my shoulders. The police have what they need. We secure my remaining assets, continue with the transfer to Portugal, and I decide what kind of father I'm going to be to a son who betrayed me. And what kind is that? Franklin asked. I looked at the empty road where the police cars had disappeared. The kind who doesn't abandon his child, even when that would be the easier choice. The kind who holds them accountable, but offers a path to redemption. The kind Maria would have wanted me to be. Franklin nodded, understanding in his eyes. She would be proud of you, Javier. No, I said quietly. But maybe someday she will be. Let's go home. The legal process moved swiftly once Thomas was in custody. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The surveillance footage, the GPS tracking data, the fraudulent credit card applications, and his own recorded admissions at the cabin. Most damning of all was his signed confession, provided in exchange for a plea deal. Alicia was apprehended 3 days later at a bus station in Vermont. attempting to flee to Canada. Unlike Thomas, she refused to cooperate, maintaining her innocence despite the mountain of evidence against her. The prosecutors were particularly interested in her case when Franklin provided information about her previous identities and the suspicious circumstances surrounding her prior relationships. 2 weeks after the arrest, I visited Thomas in the county detention center where he was being held pending sentencing. The visiting room was stark and unwelcoming, with uncomfortable plastic chairs bolted to the floor and a table between us that seemed designed to emphasize the distance that now existed. Thomas entered wearing an orange jumpsuit, his face haggard and his eyes downcast. He seemed to have aged years in the short time since his arrest. When he finally looked up at me, I saw none of the defiance that had been present at the cabin. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, his voice rough. "I almost didn't," I admitted. A silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken accusations and regrets. "Why, Thomas?" I finally asked. "I need to understand." He rubbed his hands over his face, a gesture reminiscent of his childhood, when he was trying to find the right words. "I don't have a good answer, not one that would make sense to you." "Try anyway." Thomas sighed deeply. "At first, it was just envy, I guess. You had everything figured out. The perfect career, the perfect marriage, the perfect life. And no matter what I did, I couldn't measure up." "I never expected you to be me," I said. "Maybe not consciously," Thomas countered. "But every time I failed at something, I could see the disappointment in your eyes. Every time I needed financial help, I felt like less of a man. So you decided to take everything?" Thomas shook his head. "That wasn't the original plan. When you mentioned moving to Portugal, I just thought, maybe a little help getting started. Enough to finally build something of my own." He looked down at his hands. "Then Alicia got involved, and things escalated." "You let them escalate," I pointed out. "You made choices, Thomas." "I know," he whispered. "When did you first suspect?" "Little things. Conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Questions about my finances that seemed too pointed. The sudden interest in my retirement plans." I leaned forward slightly. "I didn't want to believe it. I kept making excuses for you in my mind, finding alternative explanations. Until you couldn't anymore," Thomas finished. "Until I couldn't anymore," I agreed. Another silence fell between us, less tense than before, but heavy with the weight of all that had been lost. "The prosecutor offered me a deal," Thomas said eventually. 5 years if I testify against Alicia and return any stolen assets. They believe she's done this before, that she manipulated me into helping her." "Is that what happened?" I asked, genuinely curious if he would take the easy way out. To my surprise, Thomas shook his head firmly. "No, she may have encouraged it, but the ideas were mine too. The resentment was mine. The greed was mine." He met my eyes directly. "I'm not going to lie about that, even if it means a longer sentence." I felt a small, unexpected flicker of pride at his honesty. "That's the first good decision you've made in a long time." "I've made a lot of bad ones," Thomas acknowledged. "The worst was betraying you and everything you and Mom taught me." His voice broke slightly on the mention of his mother. "She would be so ashamed of me." "Yes," I said, not softening the truth. "She would be." Thomas flinched but nodded in acceptance. "I know it doesn't mean much now, but I am sorry, Dad. Not just for getting caught, but for what I did, for who I became." I studied my son's face, looking for any sign of manipulation or insincerity. What I saw instead was genuine remorse, and a man finally facing the reality of his actions. "I believe you," I said finally. "But trust is earned, Thomas. You've destroyed it completely. Building it back, if that's even possible, will take years." "I know," he said quietly. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that I understand what I've done. To you, to our family's memory, to myself." The guard announced that our time was almost up. I stood, hesitating before asking the question that had been weighing on me. "Was any of it real? Your grief when your mother died? Your happiness at your wedding? Or was it all part of the act? Thomas looked stricken. It was real. Mom's death destroyed me. And I did love Alicia, or thought I did. Those weren't lies. He swallowed hard. That's what makes this all worse somehow. I took real love and real grief and twisted them into excuses for doing terrible things. I nodded, accepting his answer. As I turned to leave, Thomas called after me. Dad, what will you do now? I looked back at him. What I planned to do. Move to Portugal. Start my retirement. Try to make sense of all this. Will you? He hesitated. Will you let me know where you are? Write to you? The question hung in the air between us. Part of me wanted to say no, to make a clean break from the pain and betrayal. But another part, the part that remembered holding him as a newborn and teaching him to ride a bike, couldn't bring myself to sever the connection completely. Yes, I said finally. You can write. I may not always answer, but you can write. Relief washed over his face. Thank you. As I left the detention center, I felt lighter somehow, as if beginning to shed the weight of anger and betrayal I'd been carrying. There would be no easy reconciliation, no Hollywood ending where all was quickly forgiven. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but it was a road, not a dead end, and that was something. Franklin was waiting for me in the parking lot, leaning against his car. How did it go? He asked as I approached. About as well as could be expected, I replied. He's taking responsibility, not blaming everything on Alicia. That's something, Franklin acknowledged. The prosecutor called this morning. They've found evidence linking Alicia to 2 other cases in Florida and California. Wealthy men who lost significant assets after brief marriages. She's facing multiple charges across several states. I nodded, unsurprised. And the money? Our countermeasures worked? Everything's secure, Franklin confirmed. The international transfer to your Portuguese bank is complete. The house sale funds are safely in your account. The property in Cascais is ready whenever you are. I looked out across the detention center's barbed wire fence to the mountains beyond. I think I'll delay the move a bit. There are some things I need to resolve here first. Franklin smiled slightly. Maria would approve. Would she? I wondered aloud. I failed our son, Frank. Somewhere along the way, I missed something crucial. Some lesson I should have taught him. Some support I should have given. You raised him with love and opportunity, Franklin said firmly. You can't take responsibility for his choices as an adult. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Maybe, I conceded. But I can't help thinking that if Maria had lived, she would be standing right where you are, asking the same questions, Franklin finished. But she would also be finding a way forward, just as you are. As we drove away from the detention center, I found myself thinking about the cycles of trust and betrayal, love and disappointment that define family relationships. Thomas had broken something precious, perhaps irreparably, but he was still my son, still the boy Maria and I had raised, somewhere beneath the mistakes and poor choices. The path ahead was unclear, but for the first time since discovering Thomas's betrayal, I felt capable of walking it, one careful step at a time. 6 months passed in a blur of legal proceedings, financial reorganization, and emotional processing. The summer faded into fall, and fall gave way to the first chill of winter, as I put my affairs in order and prepared, once again, for my delayed move to Portugal. Thomas's sentencing had gone much as expected. Despite his cooperation and full confession, the judge could not overlook the seriousness of his crimes. He received 4 years in a minimum security facility, with the possibility of parole after serving half his sentence. Given the potential maximum of 15 years, it was a merciful outcome. Alicia fared worse. Her previous identities and victims came to light during the investigation, revealing a pattern of predatory behavior spanning nearly a decade. Prosecutors from 3 states filed charges, resulting in a combined sentence of 12 years without the possibility of early parole. During her trial, she never once looked in Thomas's direction, treating him as if he were a stranger rather than the husband she had manipulated into crime. I attended every court date, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, watching my son face the consequences of his actions. Sometimes our eyes would meet briefly, and I would see a mixture of shame and gratitude in his expression. Grateful, perhaps, that I had not abandoned him entirely, despite having every reason to do so. The day before my rescheduled departure for Portugal, I made one final visit to the prison where Thomas was serving his sentence. The facility was less austere than the county jail, with a visiting area designed to feel somewhat normal, despite the guards and regulations. Thomas looked better than he had at sentencing. He had gained back some of the weight he had lost, and there was a clarity in his eyes that had been missing before. "You're really leaving tomorrow?" he asked after we had exchanged greetings. "Yes," I confirmed. "The villa is ready. All the arrangements are made." "I'm glad," Thomas said, and I believed him. "You deserve your retirement, the one you and Mom planned." I nodded, still finding it difficult to discuss Maria with him after everything that had happened. "I've made some decisions I wanted to tell you about in person." Thomas straightened, bracing himself, as if expecting bad news. "I've established a trust," I explained. "Not accessible until you've completed your sentence and 3 years of probation. It contains enough for a modest, fresh start. Not millions, but enough to rebuild, if you choose to do so." Thomas looked stunned. "Dad, you don't have to do that. After what I did, it's not a gift," I clarified. "It's a second chance, with conditions. The funds can only be used for education, starting a legitimate business, or housing. Any violation, any criminal activity, and it reverts to a charitable foundation in your mother's name." "I don't know what to say," Thomas murmured. "You don't need to say anything. Just use it wisely, if and when the time comes." I paused, gathering my thoughts for the next part. "I've also arranged for a financial counselor to work with you during your incarceration to help you understand where things went wrong and how to manage money responsibly in the future." Thomas nodded slowly. "Thank you. I mean it. There's one more thing," I continued. "I've been volunteering with a senior advocacy group, helping older people avoid financial scams and exploitation. It's been healing, in a way, using what happened to us to help others avoid similar pain." "That sounds like you," Thomas said with a small smile, always finding the constructive path forward. We talked for another hour, more easily than we had since before his arrest. He told me about the college courses he was taking in prison, his therapy sessions, the journal he kept daily. I shared details about my new home in Portugal, the local community I had begun connecting with online, my tentative plans for the future. As our visit drew to a close, Thomas grew serious again. "Dad, there's something I need you to know. I've been doing a lot of thinking in here, a lot of honest self-examination. What happened? It wasn't just about money or Alicia's influence." "I'm listening," I said, giving him the space to continue. "After Mom died, I felt adrift. She was always the emotional center of our family, the one who could translate between us when we misunderstood each other." He looked down at his hands. "Without her, I couldn't seem to connect with you, couldn't find the right words, and that distance grew until it felt like a canyon between us." "I felt it too," I admitted. "I didn't know how to bridge it without her, so I filled it with resentment instead," Thomas continued. "Blamed you for expectations I imagined. Convinced myself I deserved more than I had earned. He met my eyes directly, but that's on me, not you. My counselor has helped me see that more clearly." I reached across the table and briefly touched his hand, the first physical contact we had shared since his arrest. We both could have done better, made different choices, but only one of us committed a crime, Thomas said firmly. "I need to own that, completely." The guard announced that visiting hours were ending. We stood, awkward again, in this moment of parting. "I'll write from Portugal," I promised. "Send pictures." "I'd like that," Thomas replied. "And Dad, I hope you find some peace there, some happiness." I'll try, I said honestly. You focus on your rehabilitation, one day at a time. As I left the prison that day, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me for months. Not the neat, complete closure of fiction, but the messy, partial closure that real life typically offers. Thomas and I would never fully return to what we had been before his betrayal, but perhaps we could build something new eventually, something more honest and less idealized. My flight to Portugal left early the next morning. As the plane lifted into the clouds, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. I had lost my wife, nearly lost my retirement savings, and in many ways, lost the son I thought I knew. Yet somehow, I had found a resilience I didn't know I possessed. In my pocket was a business card from Detective Morales, who had handled Thomas's case. He had recently retired himself and suggested we might have coffee sometime when I visited the States. Us old law enforcement types need to stick together, he had joked, though I had never been in law enforcement. Still, I understood what he meant about the kinship of those who had seen the darker side of human nature, but chosen not to be defined by it. The villa in Cascais was everything Maria and I had dreamed about during our visit years ago. Whitewashed walls, terracotta roof, a garden fragrant with lavender and rosemary, and a view of the Atlantic that took my breath away. Standing on the terrace that first evening, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson, I felt Maria's presence more strongly than I had since her death. "We made it," I whispered to the wind. "Not the way we planned, but we made it." In the months that followed, I settled into my new life. I joined a local expat group, took Portuguese lessons twice a week, and continued my volunteer work remotely, helping seniors protect themselves from financial exploitation. I wrote to Thomas every 2 weeks, sharing small details of my daily life and the progress of my adjustment. His replies were thoughtful and increasingly introspective as he worked through his therapy and education programs. 1 year into my Portuguese life, I received a letter from Franklin with news that Alicia had attempted to implicate Thomas in additional crimes, hoping to reduce her own sentence. The accusations fell apart under scrutiny, and Thomas had maintained his integrity despite the opportunity to shift blame. Franklin noted that the prosecutors were impressed by Thomas's consistent honesty and accountability. Reading this, I felt a cautious pride. The path of redemption is neither straight nor easy, but Thomas seemed to be walking it with genuine commitment. Whether that path would eventually lead him back into my full trust remained to be seen, but the possibility existed, and that was more than I had dared hope in those dark days after the betrayal. The greatest lesson I learned through this painful chapter was the delicate balance between caution and cynicism. It is possible to protect yourself without hardening your heart completely, to be vigilant without being paranoid, to recognize human frailty, including your own, without surrendering to despair about human nature. Thomas's betrayal taught me that trust must be earned and continuously maintained, not given blindly even to those we love. But his subsequent journey reminded me that redemption is possible, that people can change if they truly wish to, and work diligently toward that change. As I write this from my terrace, watching fishing boats return to harbor in the golden afternoon light, I think about the many twists and turns that brought me here, the safe filled with worthless paper, the GPS tracker that revealed my son's betrayal, the painful confrontations and tentative reconciliations, the letting go and the holding on. If you're watching this and facing your own betrayal, your own painful crossroads with someone you love, I can't tell you exactly what path to take. Each situation, each relationship, has its own unique complications and possibilities. But I can tell you this: proceed with both your head and your heart engaged. Protect yourself without becoming bitter. Hold people accountable while leaving room for genuine change. And remember that sometimes the last laugh isn't about triumph over others, but about finding your way to peace despite the wounds they've inflicted. That's a victory no one can take from you. Have you ever had to balance justice with mercy in your own life? How did you navigate that difficult terrain? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible even after the deepest betrayals. Thank you for listening, and may you find your own path to peace, whatever challenges you're facing.